got the s252sxe parts all cleaned up. Went ahead and Cerakoted. It's hard to tell because it's kind of a cast color, but Cerakoted the center housing. I've also Cerakoted the compressor housing here. So I'm using thermal dispersant on the center housing, mostly for rust protection. This is actually piston coat on the compressor housing to try to minimize radiant heat from the manifolds. And then also went ahead and did the heat shield on the back of the turbo in that piston coat as well for a thermal barrier. So one thing to notice, some of these contact surfaces have not been coated. So on the back of that heat shield, also this guy right here, and that's to preserve generally those clearances as you stack those pieces together. The one part I am going to fully coat is the rear housing. So we'll take a look once we get it together on how that is going to look going back together. Quick look at the upgraded bearings that we're going to use. So these bearings were okay. There's almost no wear on them. You know, little micro scratches, but totally serviceable, usable bearings. But we're going with an upgrade. So the first thing I'm going to point out, if you look at that bevel on the stock Borg Warner bearing, they got a real deep bevel. And what that does is it kind of reduces the width of the inner bearing surface. Deep bevel on both sides. Comparing that to the upgrade bearing, got much less bevel, so you got a wider like thrust surface for that turbine shaft to laterally press against pressurized oiled surface. And then the next upgrade is just the size of the oiling holes. So should be a little bit of a help. I probably should have sprung for the 360 thrust as well. I'm going to be reusing the original thrust. It's got a tiny bit of unfeelable wear, one or two areas. I gave it a light hand polish as well. So total cost to rebuild this thing, as we're going to do today, is like $30 for a couple of these bearings. So for assembly lube, I've pre-mixed a little dab of high ZZDP, like high zinc, thick assembly lube, and I've thinned it out with a bit of like 540 oil. The reason for that is because when we're assembling this thing, you want to be able to feel that it spins. You want to feel the tolerances. If you just use the assembly lube, really great for protection on your first start and all that, but it will feel very stiff. It won't spin freely, and that can kind of mask some issues when you're assembling. So pretty simple. Just a full coating of oil on everything that we're going to drop in. And careful not to score this up inserting it. So just get it real precisely lined up and it'll drop right in. Next, we're going to take our little retaining circlip, and I'm going to set this up so that the kind of nose end of my little pliers here is not sticking through all that much. The reason for that is I don't want to score up the back of that bearing when I go insert this. So it might fly off a couple times. But just carefully releasing that down in the groove. And I already checked the width of these guys measured beforehand to make sure there's no difference in thickness, because you want that bearing to have fore aft play just a tiny bit for oiling. And next we're going to take our thrust. Same thing, generous coating oil. Also on the sides here. Probably the biggest challenge of this whole build is like just hanging on to all these oily parts. And I made sure to use the air gun, blow out all these little oil holes, wash everything down real good. Also getting some oil on that middle section. And then we're going to take our thrust collar. This guy, doesn't matter which side. On a 360 thrust, this is a two piece. But on the 270, it's just single piece. And then all these grooves are going to face down. We got our dowel alignment hole. And it's important to get this guy just fully straight. It can be a bit of a struggle. Again, those oily gloves coming into play already. Everything spins nice. Because everything's covered in oil, I can't see, but I'm just going to trying to confirm it's on that dowel, and I think it is. This part doesn't actually spin, so it's just held there. Everything feeling good? Next, our oil deflector. And I'll give it a bit of oil just for solidarity with everything else. Again, not a rotating piece, so it just drops in. No contact in that area there, but a bit of oil. And then next we got our little piston seal here. And it's important that it gets a little bit of oil in that groove, so I'm just going to fully submerge this guy. While I do that, use my greasy fingertip. Bit of oil on that surface. So for this guy, you want to find the gap. Put the gap in first so it pinches closed. And then kind of rock/push this into place. There we go, straight in. And checking that it rotates freely. There's actually a little bit of grab on that guy. So I think I'm going to replace that piston seal. Feeling a tiny bit of grab that I don't appreciate. Backside bearing, basically the same process. Letting it float down on its own. Feels real good. So we got a rebuild kit in for this guy. And some interesting discoveries here. So I took the rebuild kit, all the pieces out of that, and tried a bunch of different combinations to figure out what would spin the best. And essentially what it is the rebuild kit kind of sealing plate with the old collar and then the new actual like piston ring. And that gives us our smoothest operating unit. And it's quite nice. And I'll try to show you what the problem was. So I've got the old piston ring seal here. This might be a little difficult to show, but essentially right on the edge, on the corner of that piston ring, there's like a tiny little burr. So I was able to feel that when I was rotating the assembled unit. There was just one point where you could just feel it catch a little bit. And I actually, looking back at some old videos of running the engine, I noticed on idle that the wheel would kind of hesitate for a second. And I think that's that little burr catching. So I'm still going to keep all this. This is the original sealing plate with the new, the new collar and the old ring. I also swapped the original rubber is like a Viton brown rubber versus a cheaper straight up rubber seal in the new kit. So keeping that original seal as well. But yeah, problem solved for fairly minimal money in the scope of what a new turbo would cost. So we'll go ahead and pop this thing in. So taking our assembled front sealing plate, spinning nice now. Just some real gentle lubrication on the O-ring area. and dropping it straight in. So you want to make sure this is pressed down as far as you can get it, exposing the circlip groove. So in that last shot, I didn't have it all the way down, and I had to push it down slightly to get that circlip to engage. So just make sure everything goes back together nice and snug. Next step is going to be getting our turbine shaft back in. So just some light oiling on this area here. And I like to drop a drop like right in on that ring gap. And then rotate your whole ring, make sure everything is really nicely lubricated. You want to clean up anything that's going like over the turbine blades. That'll just burn off. Just a little light oil. Rotating freely, good to go. And then similarly, just a little light oiling on the groove it's going to slip in and seat on. When we were doing the Cerakote, this part was all masked off using a silicone plug. Then placing our heat shield. Just doing one last wipe along the turbine section. And we're going to lightly oil the shaft that interacts with the thrust bearings, or sorry, the journal bearings. And just a little bit down here. And I try to leave this section bare. That's where your compressor wheel is going to go. It's just not super important to oil that portion. And now, just gently inserting. You may find that some of your bearings or collars have slipped a bit, and it's necessary to kind of gently find your pathway. And definitely not forcing anything through this process. So there we go. I'll lay it on its side here. And it shouldn't take a ton of force, but just kind of rotating slightly and checking that everything spins nice and free. So yeah, that's well seated there. Good to go. Not a ton of magic on the compressor wheel side. You're going to simply slip it on. It may take a bit of heat, but we actually want this wheel to kind of grab up here, and that's why I didn't oil it. So not forcing anything. All right, looks good. Now our reverse thread compressor nut, we're not gonna put this all the way down and torque it, but I'm just gonna leave it here. And we'll take a look at our preserved balance marks. And where is our turbine side one? Is right there. So our final product is going to be something like, yeah, like about that. You can see we get all of our balance marks lined up. However, what we're going to do is rotate this guy and try to keep our balance marks on the nut and the wheel together. Around there. And then when we final torque it, so our balance mark is right there on the turbine, and as you can see right here on the nut. So we're like a quarter turn away from lining up. Bottom two oriented together, and then when we turn that nut, and this is partially the reason why I didn't oil that shaft, it's going to turn the wheel with it and line everything up to the turbine shaft, and then it will be completed. Gonna try to do this as best I can on camera. So we've got shaft orientation right there, wheel orientation here. So we're going to keep wheel and shaft orientation roughly together. I tried this a couple times off camera. A lot of turbos will want to turn the wheel at the same as the nut. So there's a bit of trial and error. This one, it appears that turbo wheel is fairly fixed. So it's not rotating as the nut rotates. So we got wheel and shaft in alignment, nut about a quarter turn to go. And we are going to hopefully just sink it home. And the trick with this is to put rotational force on, but not lateral force. Like, you don't want to bend that turbine shaft whatsoever. And the torque is far less important here than alignment. In my opinion, the torque value is primarily to prevent over torquing, to keep you from just like sending it like crazy on this thing, bending that shaft. But it's probably like 10 or 12 foot-pounds, so very much hand tool specification. So we got shaft, wheel, and nut like 1/8 of a turn. Getting closer. I'm surprised it's still not moving the shaft at all, or sorry, the wheel. But we're like one little bump away. There we go. So let's take a look at that final product. Not sure if you can see shaft alignment, nut alignment, wheel. So we're all good to go here. And there's like zero play in this thing. A tiny bit of lateral play, which is good. You don't want your journal bearings hanging up. It's absolutely silent. So that little burr on that front oil seal piston ring, that was probably the majority of my problem. And, it was like one part of that rebuild kit. I think I used like 2 parts of the rebuild kit. Yeah, this is quite good. Just a little bit of assembly lube in there. Next, just inserting that completed center section into our freshly reported and ceramic coated rear housing. Our orientation mark is right there. It's hard to see. Sharpie doesn't stick to the ceramic very well. So I tried to mark it. Not terribly important at this moment. And what is most important is just sinking this guy home straight without scraping anything. Nice and gentle. And then we're just going to rotate until we find our alignment mark, which I think is right there. I'm going to try to mark that. Roughly there. Perfect. Sticking our hardware to hold the rear housing and center section together. And when we were taking this apart, the reason we chose that location to mark our orientation was because it's exposed between those brackets. But yeah, common problem. No clearance here to get this nut in, obviously. So this is where you make use of those marks. Little rotation one direction. And let's try to take a look at how much clearance is on that nut. So yeah, I got like 2 millimeters of clearance. So from here, and I mentioned in the last video, low profile wrench is going to save us. Tighten that thing. So I'm going to go around, tighten everything on the rear housing, and then we'll flip to the front housing. So I got this set up to receive the front cover, and I've put a little smear of my worst, slowest curing RTV right in that groove. So just a tiny little smear. And now the goal is going to be to try to put this thing on in its final orientation, which I won't know because the balance marks, or sorry, the orientation marks are on the bottom. So I know the outlet comes kind of over here. So we're just going to get it on, nicely situated. And then I might have to flip it over and orient it before bolting it together. But just as nicely as possible, And real typical to drop this thing on the compressor wheel. And have it scraping. That looks like it went on nice. Clearance check. Everything rotating freely. Let's flip this thing. So I probably could have put these reference marks in a nicer location, but see, I got it pretty close. And I'm just going to rotate to align those up, and then we'll sink some bolts. So no clearance issues here, but one thing to be aware of, at least on the Borg Warner S257sxe, these front cover holes are straight through into the compressor housing. So I'm breaking out my little tube of silicone again, and we're just gonna give it a little dab. Just enough to fill those threads a little bit. And then we'll run it home. Finished product here on reassembly. Looking good overall. All the different shades of Cerakote kind of working together. Got a AN10 drain fitting on it. We'll have to make something for this 1/4 inch MPT oil feed. You can see a little bit of the damage on the threads there. So that was one of the reasons I stripped this thing down. Sucked in some material from threads shredding apart. But very happy with the result, and it spins absolutely great now. So we'll get this thing all oil fed properly and back on the car. And if you like the video, as always, like and subscribe. Add a comment if you want to see anything else, and I'll keep taking requests, keep making videos.